Alright, I am back with another build, and yes, you already know because you looked at the title, we're doing another fighter build, but I promise this is going to be the last one for a little bit, because, you know, I've played around with a lot of the new fighter subclasses that have been added thanks to the new 5e subclasses combined mod, which is available on all platforms, and I've been having a ton of fun. We've made a Psy Warrior build, we've made a Rune Knight build, and both of them turned out really, really well. And so I really wanted to make another build, just one final fighter build for a subclass that I really wanted to test, and that is Cavalier. Because with Cavalier, obviously its main kind of draw in tabletop is the fact that it is about mounted combat, but in BG3 we don't have mounts. I do think the way that the mod author has implemented the subclass is very, very well done. One of the early subclass features that focuses entirely on mounted combat was translated in an interesting and, in my personal opinion, well done way, and the rest of the subclass features don't require a mount and still work really well for team play, because Cavalier's whole deal is about goading enemies into attacking them, and then being able to kind of make it so your allies have a lot more room to breathe, because they're not going to be attacked as much. So it is a tank build, but in the way that, like, we're forcing enemies to attack us and then just being able to either dodge their hits or just completely reduce them to nearly nothing anyway. So it is a kind of another tank build, and unfortunately we have done like 3 tank builds this week, but that is just kind of how all of these new fighter subclasses kind of work. A lot of them have tanking capability that works really, really well. But I didn't just want to be like, oh yeah, let's just slap on like 10 or 12 levels of Cavalier, say, oh yeah, this works great with like just being in a regular team and call it a day. I actually wanted to build in a companion to this build. I wanted to use Beastrider Ranger, because I wanted to emulate the idea of having an animal companion to use as a mount. Hence the title of this video, the Beastrider, which I'm sure people won't try and twist and take out of context. But the problem is like that everyone knows is multiclassing out of Beastrider Ranger is pretty much always a bad idea. Beastrider Ranger doesn't really hit its full level of power until level 11, and at that point you might as well just go to level 12 for the extra feat, unless there's a 1-level dip that you really need. So how do I go about making a build that actually uses Cavalier's features well, and doesn't have a animal companion that's just going to die instantly? Well, if you've been paying attention to what I said up until now, we basically draw all of our attacks away from our animal companion, and depending on what companion we pick, we can have them do a lot of interesting abilities, such as battlefield control, being able to disable enemies pretty much entirely, or thanks to maybe, like, say, a party cleric, which I'll get a bit more into later, giving things like aid and hero's feast, that lower HP won't actually matter so much, because again, we'll be taking away so many attacks. So overall, we will actually have a way of keeping our animal companion alive, and in the combat footage that I'm showing to you now, our animal companion does not get hit even once. Despite the fact that we're using a bear with only 44 HP, they stay alive the entire fight, and are able to even disable the Steel Watcher by knocking down its weapon, and pretty much all of the animal companions will have really interesting utility that works well in this type of build. So basically what we're doing is we're using enough levels of Cavalier to kind of get the most out of its core features, but then throwing in a bit of extra battlefield control and pressure with an animal companion and their unique, you know, like I say, abilities. So I actually think this is a really interesting build, but it's not going to be the strongest thing without a bit of support from your team. Obviously, I tested this a bit solo, and this whole build was tested solo in Act 3, and it works well, but it does have some weaknesses that you do have to watch out for that can be pretty much entirely remedied by just having either a hireling in camp, or just a party member, like, say, my Twilight Domain Shadowheart build, casting aid on you to give your animal companion a bit more HP, and then you're just golden. So if you think you're looking at this build and looking at the description and seeing, like, the layout, and you're just like, this does not look strong, yes, it needs a little bit of extra work to get it to maximum efficiency, but even on its own, it still performs extremely well in the right environment. There will be some times where you'll get, like, somebody who's just really good at spamming group attacks that hit the whole party or anyone who's close to you anyway, and as such your animal companion can go down, but that's why you have the cleric with aid. Anyways, with that little preamble out of the way, kind of just like a disclaimer, let's get into the build. First off, we are going to be starting as fighter, because I do want to use our wisdom stat for a bit of equipment shenanigans that we'll get into later on in the build, so we actually do need to take ranger second, so that our what do you call it, our item spell save proficiency, like our spell casting ability with our, class is using ranger, because it always uses the last one you multiclassed into. So, but besides, starting as fighter is going to be the better option anyway. Gives us access to all weapons and armor, as well as constitution saving throw proficiency, which we're going to want for concentration spells, because there's 2 concentration spells in this build that I think are very, very valuable, that you're going to want to take into consideration and kind of have at least one of them up at all times, and having a high constitution score plus con save proficiency is going to help with that. So we're going to be doing that today. We're also going to be getting Second Wind, which is going to give us a bit of healing. Since we are going to be redirecting attacks towards us, this is going to be very, very useful. We also do get to pick a fighting style, and because Cavalier works best at kind of intercepting attacks, we are going to be using a 2-handed weapon with a long reach, in this case, glaives. So we are going to be going with great weapon fighting to give us a bit more damage overall. And finally, for our ability scores, pretty standard ranger spread here, with the aside being dexterity is low, but this is actually going to be a heavy armor build. Now, I did originally have this as a dexterity based build, but I forgot that Cavalier's features actually use your strength modifier, so I did have to turn it into a heavy armor build. Otherwise, this still works really, really well. And all of our features are based off of strength anyway, and it did give me a little bit more freedom in being able to pick an extra feat, actually, which was quite nice. So, strength is going to be at 17, we are going to be bumping this up with a half feat later. Dexterity is at 10, this is a heavy armor build, and as much as I would like to be able to go earlier in the combat, you can use equipment to kind of boost up our initiative, or be able to, do other... You can kind of, mess around if you want to throw on the gloves of dex on this build, because the gloves in this build aren't essential to the playstyle, but they do definitely help a little bit. Otherwise, you could throw on the gloves of dex for that higher initiative. Next up, Constitution is at 16. We will be bumping this up with our equipment to a nice solid 18, which is going to be great for this build. Intelligence is at 8, because we don't need it. Wisdom is at 14, because, like I say, I do want to use the spellcasting ability of Ranger a little bit. Otherwise, it's not too bad. You could bump this down a little bit if you decide to go with different equipment. And finally, Charisma is at 8, because again, we don't need it. Skill proficiencies, I've obviously gone with the Outlander background for athletics and survival. We are kind of a Beastmaster Ranger who lives out in the wild and actually rides their animals. That's why we're playing a halfling today, because, that kind of just made more sense in my head. So overall, I decided to go with that, and athletics and survival work great for this build. I've also gone with animal handling and perception for our other skill proficiencies, which, makes sense in my opinion. One of the biggest caveats of this build is the fact that your leveling is going to be a bit odd depending on what you want to do first. We're going to be taking at least 5 levels in Beastmaster Ranger anyway, so you're going to get extra attack from either source, but it depends if you want to be more of a Cavalier Fighter first or a Beastmaster Ranger first. I personally think that if you want to get the most out of this build's progression, you're probably going to want to go with just playing a standard fighter up until about level 7 and take the Beastmaster Ranger's levels after. But if you do want that kind of flavor, you could go 5 levels in Beastmaster Ranger now and get the Cavalier stuff later, but I do think as you kind of progress through the game, you're going to be either playing one or the other to start, and the actual combination of the 2 subclasses isn't really going to come into play into kind of the later stage of the game. So depending on what you want to focus on more first, if you want to go with the Beastmaster stuff first, take the 5 levels of Beastmaster Ranger now. If you want, or maybe even just 3 levels, go back to fighter, or if you just want to play a fighter that's here to tank and support for their allies, just in the early game, go for your levels of fighter now. I'll just be showing the fighter levels first so we can get to the Cavalier stuff sooner, because I imagine that's probably what most of you are here for. Then I'll talk about the Beastmaster stuff towards the end and how they synergize. So, we'll start with fighter, but again, play around with the leveling in this one and see what you kind of feel comfortable with. But with fighter level 2, we get action surge. I mean, I don't really need to explain this one. We immediately gain an extra action once per short rest to just do more damage. At fighter level 3, we get to choose our subclass, and I mean, of course we're going to be going with Cavalier. I've kind of built up to it, haven't I? Cavalier. This archetypal Cavalier excels at mounted combat. Usually born among the nobility and raised at a court, a Cavalier is equally at home, leading a cavalry charge or exchanging repartee at a state dinner. Cavaliers also learn how to guard those in their charge from harm, often serving as the protectors of their superiors and of the weak, so you can kind of see where the flavour comes in for the playstyle. Compelled to right the wrongs or earn prestige, many of these fighters will leave their lives of comfort to embark on a glorious adventure. So, at level 3 we're immediately going to grab a couple of subclass features. We're going to be grabbing Born to the Saddle. As long as you are not incapacitated, you take 1/4 less falling damage. bit of a strange one, but I guess this is meant to reflect as like mechanically accurate as you can, because in the tabletop version it was like if you fall off your mountain it's no more than 5 feet, you can just land on your feet, right? Otherwise here they've just decided, well, maybe giving us like resistance to falling damage would be too much, so we're going to reduce it by a quarter, which I think is very funny because no other subclass, vanilla or modded otherwise, I've ever seen has ever done like a 1/4 reduction, but I think it's quite funny. But that's not really what we're here for. Additionally, on your first turn of combat, your movement speed increases by 9 meters. This is meant to simulate being on a mount. I think this is equal to like the war horses kind of movement speed distance that you would kind of get at the start of your turn. So on your first turn of combat, you get to immediately set up in a position that's going to be good for you and your team. So I really like it. It basically just means like we get a little bit of just extra setup time on our first turn, just being able to quickly move into combat, which is great. But the main thing that we're here for is Unwavering Mark. When you hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, you can mark it. While within a certain distance of its marker, unfortunately the tooltip is a bit bugged, the affected entity has disadvantage on any attack not directed at you, the marker. If it deals damage to anyone other than its marker, the Cavalier gains an extra attack against it on their next turn. So if your enemy does end up completely ignoring you and going for someone else, you just get to unleash a ton of damage. So in this case, if they do go after your Beastmaster companion or one of your allies, you will just be able to unleash fury upon them. But of course, this means that most of the time with the way the AI works, they are still just going to be coming for you specifically. So you are probably not going to get as much use out of this feature as you would probably like, but on the rare occasions that it does come up and you do just get to kind of go a bit crazy, it's going to be really, really fun. But the main thing here is about protecting our allies, which is what we're able to do. You're basically also going to be able to do this a number of times equal to your strength modifier, which is why this needed to be a strength-based build. But now we kind of have our core feature for making it so that we are going to be taking the attacks for our teammates. So overall, we do get the good stuff pretty early on. We also do get to choose another skill proficiency. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. Our options, because of our earlier choices, are History, Insight, Performance, and Persuasion. I would actually personally go with Insight because we would get the highest boost out of that, but it's up to you if you want to choose something else. At level 4 of Fighter, we get to choose our first feat, and we're going to be scrolling all the way down to Tasha's Feats, again available on all platforms, which is going to give us access to the Slasher feat, which I actually mean to use this time. So we get to increase our strength or dexterity by 1, so obviously we're going to bump up our strength to make it an 18. When making a slashing attack, which we will do with glaives, you can reduce the movement speed of the target. So by attacking with maybe like say an opportunity attack, if someone is trying to go for a nearby ally, we get to just immediately reduce their movement speed, meaning that they're less likely to get where they want to go. On a critical hit that deals slashing damage, you apply the slash conditions, which makes it so the affected entity's attack rolls have disadvantage. So at worst, we are making it so our allies are harder to reach by severely reducing our target's movement speed, and also making it harder for things like ranged characters to get away from us. I believe it reduces movement speed by about 3 meters, so for most enemies, that's going to be like a third of their movement, which is pretty good. But on the chance that we get that critical hit, our tanking capability has gone up even more because, or at least our team support ability increases, because now that entity has disadvantage on their attack rolls, meaning the likelihood of them hitting our allies or our companion is even lower. Overall, I really like this for the theme of the build, but we will also be getting a kind of a more popular standardized feat in just a moment. At Fighter level 5, we're getting extra attack. You already know what it does. At Fighter level 6, we get to pick another feat, and we are going to be grabbing something here that is going to be able to give us a bit more kind of stopping power, and I think most of you probably saw this one coming. It's Polearm Master. When attacking with a glaive, halberd, quarterstaff, or spear, or pike, even though it's not mentioned, pikes do work, you can use a bonus action to attack with the butt of your weapon, so we gain a bonus action attack. Great, that's more chances to hit. You can also make an opportunity attack when a target comes within range. So what you can do is you can go to target into coming towards you, and then attack them as soon as they do. Or if someone tries to run past you to get to one of your allies, boom, you smack them. Then you apply Slasher, which means that their movement speed is going to be reduced and they're less likely to get away. Overall, it just gives us a bit more damage output, as well as being able to shut down our enemies a bit more efficiently. Overall, I really like this feature for this build. I think it works perfectly. At level 7 of Cavalier, we are going to gain access to Warding Maneuver. Cavaliers can fend off strikes directed at themselves or nearby allies a number of times equal to their Constitution modifier. So we needed a high level of Strength and Constitution to make this build work, which is why I've gone for the equipment that I have. Warding Maneuver. When you are wielding a melee weapon or a shield, so our glaive in our case, grant yourself or an ally you can see within 1.5 meters, so someone right next to you, such as your animal companion most likely, to do basically a 1d8 bonus to their armor class against an attack, and if the attack hits, the target has resistance against the damage. Yeah, so a potential +8 to your or an ally's armor class, and then if you still get hit, you just get resistance. This is a very powerful ability. I'm kind of surprised that this is here in its current form. Honestly, the boost to armor class alone would have been enough, but the fact that you gain resistance even if you're hit or your ally gains resistance is just insane. This is one of the main ways we're going to be keeping our Beastmaster companion around, because holy moly, this is quite impressive. It's definitely the best feature that this subclass has, by far, in my opinion. Now, at this point, if you wanted to just play a straight Cavalier instead, you could just go all the way to at least level 10, and if you go to level 10, you get a feature that allows you to, if you hit a creature, their movement speed is reduced even further. So that can actually be a really good feature as well. But again, I did want to give this a bit of multi-classing flair, so we're going to be moving over to Beastmaster Ranger. Now, Beastmaster Ranger is going to give us a few things, but namely at level 1 of Ranger, we're going to be getting our favourite enemy, a Natural Explorer. Entirely up to you what you want to pick here for your favourite enemy. I do go with Bounty Hunter, since we do have room to take Ensnaring Strike, which can obviously stop enemy movement, which can help obviously with battlefield control and stopping your enemies from being able to attack your allies as well, so it kind of fits into the theme. We're also going to gain proficiency in investigation, which is nice, and obviously for Ensnaring Strike, they will have disadvantage on the saving throw. So it is, even though we have slightly lower wisdom, it's still going to have a high chance to go off, so we do want Bounty Hunter here. We also do get to pick Natural Explorer as well, and if you want to take one of the resistances, that's perfectly fine, but I liked picking up Beast Tamer for Fine Familiar, because yes, it technically gives you another companion to protect. It lets you summon a crab. It's the best ability in the game, we're taking it. Next up, we also do get to pick one free extra skill proficiency, and again, entirely up to you what you want to grab here, where our current options are either stealth or nature, and since we somehow don't have nature proficiency on a build that's all about animals, we're going to be taking that. Moving on to Ranger level 2, we get to pick a fighting style. Now, we do have a bow on this build, but since our dexterity is a bit low, I don't recommend taking the archery feature. Instead, just grab defense, just to give you an extra bit of armor class, which can help with when taking hits. Since again, you're going to be taking a lot. And we also do get to pick 2 spells here, and obviously we're going to be taking Hunter's Mark to give us a bit more damage, and our animal companion eventually as well as Ensnaring Strike, as described earlier. At Ranger level 3, we get to choose our subclass, but first we do get another spell. And it's entirely up to you what you want to pick here. If you have the Mistress spell mod like I do, which is again available on all platforms and I recommend it for any playthrough, you have two options here that I think work really well. The first one being Absorb Elements, allowing us to gain resistance to basically elemental damage, so fire, cold, lightning, etc., which can really help with tanking against spellcasters, so I do highly recommend that one. The other one I recommend though is Zephyr Strike. You move like the wind and no longer provoke opportunity attacks, so if you're surrounded by enemies that you've goaded, but you need to get to an ally who's somewhere else on the map, you can quickly cast this as a bonus action, zip across the map to them with higher movement speed, and not provoke any attacks while doing so. As well as you also gain Zephyr Attack, which allows you to deal an additional 1d8 force damage with advantage on the attack roll. Overall, I think this is probably the most solid option to pick. It is going to take up our concentration though, so you can't have Hunter's Mark or our other spell that I'll be getting into later up at the same time. However, in a pinch situation where you really do need to just get across the map and be able to do a little bit of extra damage as well, I genuinely think that this is a good niche pick to have in the situations where it will be useful. But I do think if you want something with a bit more generic use, Absorb Elements will also work quite well. For our subclass, we're going to be going with Gloomstorm. I'm kidding, we're going with Beastmaster. Beastmaster is going to allow us to summon an animal companion. This can range from bears all the way to spiders, and I'll be talking a bit more about the pros and cons of each as we go. But for now, just know that we have our Beastmaster companion now at total level 10. Again, play with the levels of this one as you see fit to kind of get the mechanics that you want at certain points in the build, but otherwise, you can feel free to figure that out yourself. At Ranger level 4, you're going to gain access to another feat, and at this point, you've got a lot of things to pick from. We are using two-handed weaponry and have a lot of chances to attack, and we have ways of gaining advantage quite consistently, so Great Weapon Master is an option here. But I did find in my testing where I used Great Weapon Master, but unfortunately the kind of advantage and all that sort of thing was a bit inconsistent, so I ended up missing my attacks a bit more than I would like. You can definitely take Great Weapon Master and have someone in the party that can give you a bit of an extra buff to your attack rolls, maybe. There's some other ways you can figure it out. Maybe equipping some late game gear that boosts your attack roll chances could also help. So if you feel like you want to just go pure in on the damage, you absolutely can go for the classic combo of Polearm Master, Great Weapon Master here if you want. But in my testing, I did kind of bounce between whether I wanted to take an additional bump to my strength for the extra uses of the marking ability that I'm forgetting the name of, or constitution to have a total of 20 for extra uses of warding strike. It's entirely up to you what you want to pick here, and I definitely could recommend either or. So I would say at this level, take either Great Weapon Master, a bump to strength, or a bump to constitution. I do think for the purposes of tanking, which is what this build is mainly about, the bump to constitution is probably the best overall pick, considering it fuels our most powerful ability. So I definitely think we're going to go to a total of 20 constitution with our equipment to really feel like we are a bulwark against all different types of damage. At Beastmaster Ranger level 5, we do get extra attacks, so again, if you wanted to take these levels earlier, you absolutely could. But the main thing we're here for is Companion's Bond. Level 5 of Beastmaster is where a lot of the extra, more powerful abilities that your companions get start to come into play, which is where the things like the battlefield control options and such come in, as well as now our proficiency bonus is added to the armor class and damage rolls of our companions, so they're going to be way more tanky. So that's why having these a little bit later in the build, where our proficiency bonus is going to be a lot higher, is a bit more effective. But yeah, again, we're mainly here for the actual companions' abilities themselves, which I will get into in just a moment. Next up, we do get to choose a level 2 spell at this point, level 2 or lower, and I'll be honest, none of the level 2 spells really appeal to me here, so I think I would just go back down to level 1 and actually take Absorb Elements just for that extra bit of tankiness. And that is the build. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this is, well, you might be the greatest tank I've ever seen in this game. Not only can you make pretty much every enemy in the game come after you, you get to resist their damage or make them miss entirely with one of the most interesting defensive features I've ever seen. Honestly, the implementation of this subclass in BG3 is absolutely excellent. Not to mention that you're going to have a ton of options to adapt to many different situations. Hunter's Mark for damage, Zephyr Strike for movement, and any of your Companion's Bond abilities. You also obviously gain the things like the Unwavering Mark attack and such like that, and again, you are a level 7 fighter, you've got that extra feat, you've got action surge, you're going to be able to dish out a lot of damage over a long battle, so I would just go for short Nova Burst rounds as well. You have a lot of different ways of approaching combat, which I think is relatively interesting, but that Companion's Bond feature is where this build's diversity really does come into play. So let's go over that now. For your Beastmaster companions, you have 5 options: a bear, a boar, a wolf spider, a dire raven, and a wolf. I'll go over kind of the pros and cons of each and which ones I think synergize the best with our overall gameplay strategy. First up, the bear, the one you will have seen in the combat footage. Overall, this is a solid pick if you're not really sure what's going to be useful. It has the most HP overall, sitting at about 39 base when the build is complete, as well as being able to be bumped up with things like aid and such quite well. Definitely the tankiest build and the most likely to survive actually being hit. Its best feature that it gets, though, for sure, it's got 2. First up is Goading Roar, which is kind of does the same thing as your Cavalier feature. It goads enemies into attacking it. And I did test, like, this was kind of interesting, actually. You'll see in the combat footage that I used both Goading Roar and the Cavalier features to see which one the enemy would prioritize attacking. And it seems as like the Cavalier like your main character will always be prioritized over the Bear's Goading Roar. It might have like kind of a higher like priority order or something, like maybe how it's coded. So really Goading Roar is kind of meh, and besides we don't really want our companion to be attacked if we can help it, so I would say that feature is not really useful here. The very useful feature though is Honeyed Paws. Honeyed Paws allows you to attack a enemy, and when they are hit, they have a chance to be disarmed, and if they have no weapon, they'll fall prone. Both of these are extremely favourable outcomes. In the combat footage, the bear is able to disarm a Steel Watcher, making it an absolute cakewalk to defeat, which is very, very useful. And then it's also able to knock things like the Flaming Fist soldiers prone, which of course is something you always want to do. So for overall tankiness and that little bit of battlefield control with Honey Paws, I actually think the Bear Companion is a solid choice. But is it the best? Well, let's find out. Next up is the Boar Companion. The Boar Companion is quite interesting. It has a charge feature which can potentially knock enemies prone, which is another plus, but also at level 5 it gains the ability to basically use Barbarian's Rage, gaining resistance to physical damage, and also it's like the Frenzy from Berserker, so it's able to attack as a bonus action while raging. If you want a companion that can output damage, this is the one to go for. But unfortunately, with the fact that we're only level 5, unfortunately, it's just not as much damage. We're not really here like it's not enough damage, let's say, to like really be worth it, because we don't really want our animal companion to be a damage dealer. We want them to be a support. We want them to be battlefield control. We don't just want raw damage. So in my opinion, the boar is probably the worst option. It will probably be able to tank a few hits. It has a decent amount of HP, but that resistance is definitely more important. But we can give our animal companion resistance anyway through our Cavalier features, so honestly, I think the boar is one to stay away from in this particular build. Next up, the Wolf Spider, probably the second best option. This has a ton of battlefield control, being able to use webs to kind of trap enemy movements. At level 5 it can also straight up cocoon them, making them completely immobile, basically just making difficult terrain that is hard to move for your enemies to move through. And it can also poison enemies for like disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks, which is going to help everyone's survivability. If the enemy can't really attack very well, then nobody's getting hit, either yourself or your companion. And it just does a pretty solid chunk of damage anyway as well. But that poison condition plus the battlefield control that it gets with the webs is actually really strong. The reason I say this is probably the second best option is, while it has an 18 armor class, which is the highest armor class we have so far, it's not as high as another one of the animal companions, and it does come with the big caveat that if your allies aren't prepared to walk over the webs themselves, could actually be a very double-edged sword, meaning that yourself and your allies are going to have a hard time maneuvering around the battlefield because of your own ability. So you do need to be really careful about that. Overall, if you can position it well and get off those poisons, this is a very, very strong companion to have, and because we give it such high armor class between our abilities and the level 5 feature to add our proficiency bonus to the armor class, so this thing is at least going to be sitting at like a 23 armor class, or 22, sorry, which is really damn good. It doesn't have that much HP, so if it does get hit, it's pretty much going to die in one hit in the late game. So you do have to be a little bit careful, but I do think the Wolf Spider is a very solid option overall. The best option, I think, however, is the Dire Raven. The Dire Raven does a similar thing to what the Wolf Spider does, in the fact that it has great battlefield control. It's able to blind enemies, which will cause them to have disadvantage to hit anybody, but also we will have advantage against them. So it's slightly better than the Cocoon feature in that sense. In addition to this, it also has the Bad Omen ability, allowing it to mark a target itself, and when it does so, all attack rolls against that target will have advantage, making it a great support and utility option. Not to mention it also has a flying speed, allowing it to maneuver itself around the battlefield very, very easily, and the highest armor class of any of the animal companions at 19, for a total of 23, plus whatever we add on from our Cavalier defensive feature. We are just going to be keeping this guy alive pretty much all the time, and the benefits that he's going to apply to the whole team are just going to be amazing. And again, even though it does have, a different way of applying battlefield control to the wolf spider. It's not a form of battlefield control that's going to be detrimental to us. So overall, I think the dire raven is probably the best choice for your companion. And lastly, we have the wolf, which I would say is probably on the same level as the bear in terms of utility. Basically, its biggest feature is packed tactics, where you are able to give anyone who is near you advantage, which obviously is a pretty great feature, but since the other animal companions have so many ways of giving us advantage in my opinion, slightly more useful ways, I don't see the wolf being that great. Its ability to inflict septic is okay, but I would say, actually, now when I think about it, the more I think about it now when I'm saying it, I think it's actually kind of slightly worse than the bear. As well, it does have a slightly higher AC than the bear, it has way less HP, so I think in terms of tankiness, it's not got enough on either side of the armor class or HP spectrum to really survive on the chance that it does get hit, which again, wouldn't be often if this build performs as expected, which it did in testing, but again, there is always that chance. So I think wolf is probably one I would also stay away from. I would say you either want to pick the bear, wolf spider, or dire raven in most combat situations. Right, with that out of the way, and now that you've seen the companion options, let's move on to the equipment. So the equipment for this build is pretty standard in a lot of cases, but there are some interesting fringe picks that I will explain. First up, the Dancing Breeze is our weapon of choice. Again, this is kind of a layover from when this was a dexterity-based build, but I still found that it worked really well in practice and decided that I wanted to keep it. The Dancing Breeze is a +2 weapon that has the extra reach feature which we want, but one of its unique features, other than the fact that it's finesse, is the whirlwind attack. Strike out against all nearby foes, making separate attack rolls against each target. You can use this once per short rest. This allows you to hit multiple enemies at once. If you've managed to goad multiple enemies into attacking you, then you can hit them all. And in fact, every enemy that you hit will actually have the mark and the goading effect applied to them. So this can allow you to affect multiple enemies at once, which is really, really good. It also comes with because it's a glaive, it comes with brace as well. And since we're kind of going to be hunkering down in one spot and just kind of taking enemy aggro, we can go for this ability to just sacrifice movement speed that we're not going to be using anyway for a bit more melee damage. So I think this is a great feature to have. We also have Rush Attack for a bit more movement, and Lacerate for the bleed effect. So overall, I think the Dancing Breeze is a very, very solid option for this build, but feel free to take any other kind of long-ranged two-handed weapon. I do think glaives work best, of course, because we are using the slasher feature, so I would stay in that kind of area, but things like the Drakeford glaive obviously also work, so feel free to choose what you like. For an early game option, I recommend Sorrow. It's a nature-themed glaive, so obviously that works greatly for this build, is a +1 weapon, and comes with the Sorrowful Lash ability, allowing you to basically cast Thorn Whip as a bonus action once per turn. So honestly, it's a very solid option, and if you wanted to try buffing this up with the Drakeford glaive, could actually be a very solid option all the way through the game. So it's actually a kind of a pick-your-favourite situation here. I liked the Dancing Breeze a bit more in practice, but I do think the Sorrow is a cool, unique playstyle that you could go for if you want to. So yeah, feel free to pick it up. Moving on to our ranged weapon. Yes, we have the Darkfire Shortbow here. It's going to give us resistance to fire and cold damage, two very common damage types that are going to come from spells, which is going to be good for tanking. But also, we get haste, which we're not going to be using on ourselves. We're going to use this on our animal companion. Because we're not getting extra attack from level 11 of Beastmaster Ranger, this will give us a lot more freedom. It costs our concentration, of course, but if we drop concentration, it's not us that's going to become lethargic, it's our animal companion, so that's a plus. As well as the fact that this gives a +2 to armor class, pretty much all of the Beastmaster companions are going to be impossible for your enemies to hit without, like, spread attacks like Fireball, right? As well as the fact that they will gain an extra action, basically kind of emulating extra attack for a Beastmaster companion, but we get to use our battlefield control options twice per turn. Overall, this is probably the best spell to be concentrating on if you want to get the most use out of your companion. Otherwise, Hunter's Mark for damage. So yeah, we definitely wanted haste somehow on this build, and this is the best way to get it. Moving on to our headgear, we have the Diadem of Arcane Synergy. Because we're going to be using Cavalier's ability to mark our enemies, like 100% of the time, we will have 100% uptime on the diadem, giving us arcane synergy, which will give us an additional bit of damage equal to our spellcasting ability modifier. For us, that's wisdom, so that's +2 to every attack we do, which honestly is pretty good, so I think this is worth having around as an early game option. For a kind of a mid to late game option, you can go for the Circlet of Hunting, giving you a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls against creatures marked by Hunter's Mark, True Strike, Fairy Fire, or Guiding Bolt. For us, that'll be Hunter's Mark. However, if you go down the Great Weapon Master route, I can recommend things like the Mask of Soul Perception to give you better initiative rolls, attack rolls, and perception checks. So you can go for that as well if you like. Moving on, we don't really have a specific cloak on this build, so you can put whatever you like here. We have the Dwarven Splint Mail as my armour of choice obtained in Act 2. You take 1 less piercing damage, okay. You gain a +1 bonus to strength saving throws and checks, that's nice. Disadvantage on stealth checks, we weren't really doing that anyway. But the main thing here is it's a heavy armour with a +19 armour class with our defense, with our defense fighting style, that's 20. That gives us a +2 to Constitution for a total of 20, giving us a very solid 136 HP, and a bunch of uses of our, what's it called here? Where is it? I forget. It's the warding maneuver. Yeah, so we get a lot of uses of warding maneuver here, which is very, very nice, because again, it's a once per long rest thing, so we want as many uses as we can get. So honestly, I do think this is probably the best option for this build. Moving on, for our gauntlets, we have the Hell Rider's Pride. Whenever you heal another creature, it gains resistance against bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage dealt by weapon attacks. Now, this works if we heal ourselves, so you want to combine this with the Ring of Regeneration, which heals you every turn for 1d4 hit points. So now, you have the Barbarian's damage resistance at all times with this combination, which is going to be great, meaning we don't have to spend our warding maneuver charges on ourselves. We can save them for our companion and our other teammates. Whereas now we are just going to be extremely tanky across the board. So I felt like this was a decent combination to have on this build. Finally, for the boots, we have the Acrobat Shoes, giving us advantage on dex saving throws. Our dexterity is pretty low, meaning that things like Fireball and other dex saving throw spells are going to be pretty damaging for us, so getting advantage on dex saving throws to have a much higher chance of being able to succeed the saves and take half damage is going to be very, very good. Fireball is kind of a generic choice of, like, as an example. I know we already have fire resistance, but there is a lot of, like, powerful dex save spells in the game, so having these is pretty good. But if you're going with something like the Wolf Spider Companion, maybe you want to swap these out for the Disintegrating Nightwalkers. This is kind of a free slot, but the Acrobat Shoes did feel right here. Keeping in the theme of the build, we have the Unflinching Protector Amulet. Once per short rest, you can force any attack made against any one of your allies to just automatically miss. This is extremely powerful. It's a late game feature, but it fits so well for this build. In the case that all of our features fail, you have one legendary protection usage that you can use to save the day. Fits too well for this build. We've already gone over the Ring of Regeneration, and we also have the Shifting Corpus Ring, which may seem like a bit of a weird choice, because it's 2 concentration spells that are kind of just meh, especially in the late game. This is a free ring slot that you can choose what you like, but I did want to point out some interesting utility that we have here. First up is the Blur spell, giving all attacks disadvantage to hit us, so we can goad enemies into attacking us, and then they'll have disadvantage to hit us, which is pretty good. But the other interesting thing here is invisibility. We can touch a creature to turn it invisible. This does not have to be ourselves, meaning that we can choose our animal companion or an ally that's next to us, and our enemy just is never going to be able to attack them if maybe they're low health and they need to get out of there or something like that. Or for our animal companion, until they use one of their abilities, they can just stay out of sight until they're needed. Overall, I thought it was a bit of fun, flavorful utility that can work well for this build, but feel free to swap this out for whatever you like. And finally, for our camp clothing, we are once again, as always, using the Fear Tailor camp clothing mod available on all platforms, which allows us to use the Druid hide armor and the House and Shoes camp clothing to get this kind of druidic kind of warrior look, which I really, really love for this build. So yeah, that is the build, and what else can I say other than it's probably one of the more interesting builds I've ever made. again, like I say, it's really hard to use a lower level Beastmaster Ranger to great effect, but Cavalier, being just as adaptable and versatile as it is, just makes this combo work, and the battlefield control options that come from things like the Dire Raven or the Wolf Spider can just really turn the tide of a battle in your favour. Now, I would say that maybe in bigger boss fight encounters where the bosses have a lot of unique kind of AoE attacks, this build is going to suffer in terms of keeping up the Beastmaster Companion, and unfortunately if you don't have a Beastmaster Companion out on the field, you don't really have a subclass. That is definitely the biggest weakness of this build. But again, Cavalier itself, even with just 7 levels, is so strong and works so well with for either yourself or your regular allies that it's not really going to matter too much. Are we technically making this build weaker by going with 5 levels of Ranger and having an animal companion rather than just going with 12 levels of Fighter? Yes, probably, but this is more fun. And again, you're playing a Cavalier, we've got to have a mount in quotations, and being able to say, oh yeah, my character is a halfling that rides a bear into battle and, you know, fuck shit up. Or maybe you could do like a Breath of the Wild style glider thing with the Dire Raven, so you're like floating around, almost like V from Devil May Cry with his like double jump feature or something like that. Like you're just gliding around, like on the, like holding the claws of the Dire Raven. Like there's just a ton of fun flavor you can throw onto this type of build, which is why I made it a halfling, because again, halflings don't get enough love. So I really did want to show this one off today, and you know what, I'm really happy with this build. It performed better than expected. It was a bit tricky to figure out exactly how to get everything working, but once it does work, it works very, very well. So honestly, very, very proud of this one. I think it's a very unique and interesting concept. But again, it does come with a few more caveats at that I would like. Speaking of which, though, I will say, as I said at the beginning of this video, I think this build works amazingly with a cleric in the party. A fully leveled cleric. Probably Twilight Domain would be best if you're also using that mod, available to all platforms, because, like, for example, my Shadowheart build that I did a couple of weeks ago using the Twilight Domain, you can see how tanky it makes the whole team. Being able to cast Aid, eventually Hero's Feast, and using Twilight Sanctuary to gain extra temporary HP, I mean, that's just going to give your whole team even more survivability, and if you combine this with the 2 previous fighter builds that I've made with the Psy Warrior and the Rune Knight, yeah, you're going to have an unkillable team. Just straight up, nothing else to it, nobody is dying today. And I think, and they all do it in such a different way, that I think it's great. I will honestly have to test out that party composition against something like Raphael or whatever, because I actually think it's a very cool idea. Just 3 amazing frontline defenders and a support. Like, I don't know, I think it's a very, very interesting idea, so maybe I'll actually give that a try. Maybe that'll be a stream or something in the future. Play a profile up till Raphael and test some weird party comps on him. Who knows? But anyways, I will probably stop rambling now, as I've done enough of it already, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.